They aren't very highly agitated. They're very laid back. They're very easily trainable. Sometimes they think they're as big as a horned owl, but they're not going to do as much damage to you as, say, this is Luna. She's a barn owl. Let me tell you about her first. She was hit by a car. She was an adult. So this is another thing. When you're dealing with adult wild birds, they're going to have that fear of us. So it takes a lot of work keeping them calm. She still has her moments, but the more you work with them, the easier it gets. I really don't have any birds that came to us. We do have a Cooper's hawk that came to us young, a couple other birds that came to us young, but most of the birds that we get in are adults that have injuries. So you're dealing with an adult bird that's been in the wild that thinks of us as predators. So we have to really work with them to make them understand that we are not going to hurt them and that they can trust us. She had damage to her wing and she had some head trauma, is how we ended up with her. We've had her about 5 years now. Not sure how old she was already a mature adult. We have a van that we transport everything in, so that's another consideration. What are you going to transport these animals in if you have more than one? If it's just a screech owl, you can fit it in your car. When you have this many, you probably need a van. We had a van donated to us that we use for transportation. But every dime that we make from our Raptor Roadshow literally goes directly back to our rehab program. So not only are we out there educating people about these animals and how to help them, but we are also raising money for the rehab program that, rehab is not cheap and people are not always forking out money to us. A lot of times people think us rehabbers are funded by the government, we just have all this money, and you need volunteers, you need people, as I say, I need people to walk the birds. And my volunteers and my employees, they go through a training process. They start with the screech owl. They show me they're doing good with the screech owl, and we have a ladder of what's next. And right now, Hannah is doing Luna, and I call Luna the final exam because she's really good, but she can have her moments too. So finding good volunteers that understand that it's not all about coming out and hugging and loving and kissing. It's also about being professional, knowing how to handle them. These are animals. You never know what they're going to do. They might not want to come out of that crate today. And if they don't, we're not going to make them. So that is one reason why we do have a variety of animals here, in case one isn't quite into it. So you have to understand, these are not little machines. We're not going to use them. And we have a good amount of birds. I have several different types of hawks. So we rotate out. We're not using the same birds all the time. I like to rotate them out to kind of give them that break. So you have to realize that when you're working with them. But the more you work with them, the better it is for that bird too. Especially if it's a wild adult bird that came in initially through your rehab program. So you have to work, because the more you work with them, the more relaxed that bird's going to be, and the better chance you have of a happy bird that's going to come out of that crate and not have any issues. So I have a very small, I'm very, very picky about my volunteers. You're always getting calls, oh, can I come and hold the owls? And, it's like, well, first you got to prove to me you're serious. I usually make them, they have to clean cages. They have to make Buteo family. And this is the broad-winged hawk. So he's the smallest Buteo hawk in this area. And we actually have all three Buteos. We have Bailey, the broadwing. We have a red shoulder, and we have a red tail. So they're all very similar. The Buteo family hawks are pretty easy to work with. The great horn is pretty easy to work with once they get over their initial fear of you, because the great horn has that strong grip that can crush bones if they really wanted to. So that's why the more you work, the better. But in terms of a non-owl, I would say we don't get as many broadwings as, say, the red tails and red shoulders in this area. But the broadwing is nice because we have a hawk and it's little. So I like the smaller birds better because it's easier to get around with them. You have smaller crates. and it's just easier to deal with them in that way. The Buteos tend to be a little more laid back. You can see Bailey's just, first of all, I want to point out Bailey has a very wide stance on the glove because the inside wing, his right wing, he was hit by a car and he can't even extend it out. So he kind of stands a little wider to really balance himself well, because a lot of birds, to balance themselves, they'll kind of, use their wings to balance. And since he can't extend out this one, he tends to stand that way. When I'm dealing with volunteers, you don't just show them one bird and say, this is how you do it, because each bird is an individual. And you have to realize that when you're working with them. Bailey is totally different from our red-shouldered hawk, Jazz. Jazz was almost an imprint. He was a habituated young one that fell out of the nest when he was about 2 weeks old. So he's very used to people. So Bailey is a totally different bird to work with as compared to Jazz, our red-shouldered hawk. So you have to learn the individual bird and how they're going to be and how they're going to react everywhere. You also got to look at your surroundings. So she's the smallest falcon that we have living in the area. Her name is Cassie. She was also hit by a car. Again, there's been a theme here. She has damage to one of her wings. And so the falcons, I like to talk about their speed, about the peregrine falcon being the fastest animal on Earth, faster than the cheetah that everybody thinks is the fastest animal. I talk about basically, she's not the fastest, but she catches birds in midair, which is still pretty cool. Falcons all have the malar stripes on their cheeks, and that's how you identify them, is by looking for that striping. The peregrine has a big wide stripe. The kestrel has the two stripes going down. You can actually, the kestrels are sexually dimorphic. You can tell the girls from the boys. Most of your birds of prey, they all kind of look the same, except for size. With birds of prey, the females tend to be larger than the males. But if you haven't been around them much, how do you know if that's a big or a little horned owl? But she's a female. She's got the bars going down her back. The males are basically a slate gray going down their back. That's one of the ways that you can tell them apart. Mainly insects are what they eat, a lot of flying insects. She'll eat small birds, little warbler-sized, wren-sized birds. She'll eat mice, but she does like to hang out in very open areas where she can be out in a field where all of these animals tend to hang out that she likes to eat. This is a bird that's actually, their population has become a lot lower than it was in the past. It used to be you could go down the highway and always see kestrels on power lines or fences, but they're actually doing a lot of studies right now, trying to figure out what's going on. Probably a lot of it's pesticides, reducing the insect amounts, also habitat loss. So, you always want to talk about this to the public, about habitat loss, about pesticides, and a variety of other things that are affecting these birds. Pollution, litter. A lot of times, I keep talking about these birds that were hit by cars, and a lot of times these birds are getting hit by cars because of things being on the side of the road. Seagulls. Pretty much every seagull I get at the center was hit by a car, because they're scavengers and people are just throwing stuff out of their car, and the seagulls are in there seeing if there's food and they get hit. But even these hawks and falcons are starting to learn about things being near the road, because you have the mice and the rats that are also hanging out near the road eating the food that the people are throwing out. So, this is a good time to, tell, especially the kids, if we can start young, they're going to pass it on. And don't throw litter on the ground. Don't throw anything out of the window of your car, because that might end up... So this is Luco. He's our bald eagle. And he has a really interesting story. I'm starting him on a new glove, and he is not happy. It's like it's too shiny and too clean. So yeah, we're still working with the glove. But he has an interesting story. First of all, he was born in 1999 in Cape Canaveral, Florida. And back in that time, U.S. Fish and Wildlife used to know where all the bald eagle nests were, and they would check to see how many babies there were. And when they were checking Luco's nest, they noticed there were 2 babies, and Luco had a deformed beak. They were about 4 days old at the time. So they removed Luco from the nest because they knew with his beak that he would not be able to survive. Because as I tell everybody, when you're talking about birds of prey, their hooked beak is what they use to tear their food up with. You know, they don't have teeth for tearing. And since his beak was deformed, the Fish and Wildlife officer knew he could not eat later on. You know, right now, Mom and Dad were feeding him. He was fine, but down the line, they knew they couldn't. So he was brought to a rehab center down in Maitland, Florida, where they tried in every way to fix the beak. He was actually sent to a place in Texas where they worked on his beak, and it just, we feel like it was congenital, that he was born with it deformed, probably in the egg. Maybe it was pressing against the shell, which caused it to be pushed to the side. It's hard to say. But we actually have to file his beak every month. He went to several other centers during his lifetime. He was at Callaway Gardens. He is a flighted bird. The only thing wrong with him is his beak. But just because he can fly doesn't mean he can survive in the wild, because he can't eat. He used to be in a flighted show. This is another whole, some educators do flighted shows. To do a flighted program, you need to be able to work that bird every day. They have to be on a special diet. And I will be honest with you, I do not have the time to put into it to have a flighted demonstration with Luco. It does take every day working with that bird. And the flighted shows are very impressive. It's amazing to see them flying, but if you don't have the time, don't get into it. A bird on a glove can be just as impressive as a bird flying, you know, over the audience. So take that, you know, consideration when you're doing it. With Luco, I'll be honest with you, the hardest part with him is his weight. It gets, you literally, as you're handling these birds, because if you're right, have your right hand free. So, you know, when you start with the screech owls, it's like nothing, and you keep going up, and you're kind of feeling it in your bicep. By the time you get to the bald eagle, it's like, I remember the first time I ever held a bald eagle, I thought in the first 30 seconds I was going to die, because he's almost 7 pounds. And, you know, you're thinking, well, that's really not that much, but it does get heavy over time. And then when he flaps his wings, as he's doing now, that doesn't help much either. Bald eagles take a lot of work. It's something, like I said, you do need a permit to do it. It is very impressive to have one at a program. I mean, I'll be honest with you, people, I mean, I've been doing this for I don't know how long, and I'm still in awe. I still think to myself in the evening that, my God, I was holding a bald eagle today. I will always be in awe. It's a bird that does take a lot of work. They are very heavy. It's a lot harder bringing them, because I know, we're feeling very happy today. As I showed you, his crate is a lot bigger. It takes 2 people just to carry him in, but a very impressive bird. But again, a totally separate permit to have your bald eagle. But that is basically it. I'm going to put him up. If y'all have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. This is just a totally different program for me. Like I said, the whole part of the program, my program usually lasts about 40 minutes when I'm doing the Raptor Roadshow. You kind of judge the audience too. You know, when you have smaller kids, you might shorten it a little bit. If you have adults, you might extend it a little bit. But these programs are just so good for us and for the birds and the animals, because the more education we do, the better it's going to be for the animals in the long run.